Radio on this Tuesday evening, the night of the New Hampshire primary, and I am so pleased to report that my man, Ron Paul, has finished in second place, a strong second place at that, and will capture many of the delegates going to the Republican National Convention. So, I mean, it's a good day. This was very, very good news for us, and now it's on to South Carolina, where Ron Paul's really got some work to do, and we all have some work to do, and hopefully get this guy elected. I have to say, I'm very optimistic. My guest tonight, my man Tim Watts. We're going to be talking about a whole host of things. Ron Paul, conspiracy, more conspiracy.
I won't be able to sleep tonight.
That's right. That's right. I wanted to bring something up. I did a Intel Hub news brief that'll be coming out here shortly at the intelhub.com. And I was responding to an email that I got. An email that I received said something, I'm going to paraphrase it, but it said, one of the reasons why I can't convince my friends about Ron Paul is because they say his foreign policy is dangerous. And then he gave me 2 WorldNet Daily articles to back it up. Now, for folks that don't know about WorldNet Daily is probably one of the biggest neocon mouthpieces out there. Jerome Corsi, all these guys from the CNP. This is their stomping ground, WorldNet Daily. And they brought up 2 articles. The first one is, Meet Ron Paul's Jeremiah Wright. Isn't it interesting that they're putting Ron Paul and Jeremiah Wright in the same context? They're kind of lumping them together. And this all has to do with foreign policy. What they're talking about in this article primarily is Jeremiah Wright's position on 9/11 and what Ron Paul's position on 9/11 is. And they're saying, it's eerily similar. When Jeremiah Wright said, well, the chickens have come home to roost about 9/11. And Ron Paul saying, hey, it's blowback. Pretty much saying it's the same thing. And another article written on the same day saying Ron Paul's Saul Alinsky, referring to the famous communist. And I always love an article when it says this, when the first sentence is, let me begin by making it very clear there are a lot of reasons to love Ron Paul. That's when you know, better get the analies. Because really, man, when they start an article like that, you know that you're in for some crap.
They get the pleasantries out of the way early.
Right. So everybody has this idea, Ron Paul, he's crazy. The guy's off his rocker, just out of touch when it comes to foreign policy. And what's funny is if you have the life experience and you've spent any time overseas in Iraq, in Afghanistan, heck, if you spent time in Serbia, any time like that, what you'll come to find out is that about 99% of the people over there are just like you and me. They just want to be left alone. They want to raise their family, and they just don't want to be bothered. But it's this 1%, kind of like the ultra elitist over here, the ones that pull the puppet strings. It's the same thing over there, only they label them Islamic extremists. And so Ron Paul takes a position of deterrence when it comes to dealing with Iran or any of these other nations, much the same way we treated Cuba and Russia during the Cold War, whereas he takes a position of, you make it so they'll be scared stiff to hit you. And also that you follow the Constitution, and if you do go to war, you get a formal declaration of war. That way, you're totally and completely justified to level every square inch of the country you're going to war with. because that's what war is all about. It's not about, well, let me hit this building, but there's a church right next to it. We can't do that. And there's a school right next to that. We can't do that. Oh, but they're hiding tanks in there. But okay, whatever. That doesn't happen when you have a formal declaration of war. But what we have now, of course, is illegal wars financed by banks, private banks that are making a fortune financing both sides. And as long as they have their illegal wars, they'll continue to fleece us, the American public, who are complicit because they are silent. But I'm very, 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 very encouraged by what I'm seeing with this turnout for Ron Paul, because it's showing that people are waking up and they're not silent, that they don't want these illegal wars, that they don't want needless bloodshed, and that perhaps they're getting in touch with their humanity again, something that we haven't been as a people in quite a long time. So before you get on the bandwagon with these neocons, you should really think twice about what you're thinking and say to yourself, how would I want to be treated in that situation? Would I want people coming over and telling me how to live and telling me what to do? Is that what we want? Do we want the red Chinese coming over here and taking over things? Because I guarantee you there'll be some pissed off Americans when that day comes. And some of them might go to the point of blowing themselves up. Who knows? But I know that I wouldn't want to be faced with that scenario, and I certainly wouldn't want to be treated that way, and that's the way we're treating people today. And Ron Paul is the only one of these candidates out there that would change that behavior. So you have to ask yourself, what's the truth? And even if you don't agree with this man, even if you don't see eye to eye and you think he's just totally nuts, off his rocker about foreign policy, at least you could say the man is honest and he stands by his convictions and he has honor, he shows commitment, and he has the courage to stand by it. And I'm telling you, folks, you will not find another politician out there like him, at least not running for the Republican nomination. You won't find it. And if you can show me an instance, anybody, show me an instance of anybody that's running in the Republican Party that stands up and has a record like Ron Paul, I will quit the show tonight. No more. But ain't going to happen.
For crying out loud, look how scared they are of him. Everybody attacks him. That ought to tell you something right there, that there's something good about the guy. When everybody starts dumping on the guy, start taking a harder look, folks, because they're scared of this guy, because
they are.
He wants to do some good things for us.
I think he's the only one, at least that I know, that's not drawing a salary in Congress. He doesn't take it.
Did you see what he said? If he got the presidency, he would dump the $400,000 plus salary, and he would live on like $30,000 a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What the hell
cool.
does he need that for? And I'll bet you he doesn't take the vacations.
No.
I'll bet you. We really need to get behind him, support him, do whatever we can to make sure that Ron Paul gets into that presidency one way or another, folks. We'll be right back after these messages. You're listening to the Freedomlink Radio on the Orion Talk Radio Network. We'll be right back. My email address is thefreedomlink@centurylink.net. That's thefreedomlink@centurylink.net. Drop me a line, and I'll be sure to get back with you. Please, I do appreciate every bit of feedback that you guys have to give me. Not to mention the tips. Man, I've been getting flooded with emails lately, and I can't say enough. You know what's funny, Tim, is the amount of emails. It's not funny. It's actually encouraging. The amount of emails I get from young people, like teenagers.
Really?
Yeah, unbelievable. Unbelievable amount of teenagers lately have been emailing me, asking me about, well, what if something's not right, then where do I start to look? Oh, really? All right.
Wow. Wow, very good.
It's awesome.
That's encouraging.
Well, one of the things that we have in, especially people like you, myself, the people at Orion, and other people out there, especially the YouTubers, they get into conspiracies, and in a lot of ways, they're vilified for it, for actually digging and trying to find the truth of a lot of events that have happened in our history. And there's really nothing wrong with the word conspiracy. As a matter of fact, I think it's a good word. When you're in a search for truth or for answers, like my wife just said, it's a healthy journey, because it tells you that you're in the right frame of mind. You're not just asleep. And you've been doing it for years, haven't you?
It's a dictionary definition. If you look in Webster's, it doesn't say tinfoil hat under conspiracy. They have a definition for what conspiracy is, and it's when two or more people come together to act with criminal intent. It happens every day, folks. It's a government crutch. We talked about that Sunday night. It's something that they use to their benefit. It's a tool, I should say, because as we talked, the U.S. Justice Department, they prosecute conspiracy every single day. And they know what conspiracy is. But yet when somebody finally points the finger at government for crimes of state, well, then suddenly conspiracy is, conspiracy is a bad thing. That doesn't exist. It's just a bunch of you flakes out there that have some wild allegations. And, so they try to have it both ways. They prosecute for conspiracy every single day. But then again, when you try to bring it up against them, no, they'll have none of that.
That's true. Well, on Sunday, we started talking about conspiracies and the media. And why don't you just go ahead and recap for everybody what we talked about, and then we'll take it from there.
Well, that was the main point to think about, folks. When somebody yells conspiracy theory, that's pretty much like, in The Wizard of Oz when they said, don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. They don't want you to look. It's a conditioned response that we've all been ingrained with for years now. And when someone cries conspiracy theory, that's the time to sit up and look. That's the time to take, a deeper investigation into what's going on, because someone's trying to hide something from you. Conspiracy theory, again, is a legal definition: two or more people coming together to act with criminal intent, and that's really what it is. It's a known fact of life. We've got good and bad in this world, and it's been that way since the days of Adam and Eve. So to think that there aren't people in government committing crimes of state is absolutely ludicrous. And they don't want you to take a look at conspiracy theory. Now, the other side that we mentioned to conspiracy theory is what I like to now call coincidence theory. So if you don't buy conspiracy theory, then what is it? You're a coincidence theorist. You actually have to believe that everything happens because of a coincidence. And we talked about all the myriad conspiracies that we've had down through time, and geez, there's so many of them. We talked a little bit about Pearl Harbor, and Admiral Kimmel admitting that the U.S. had broken the Japanese codes. They knew about the attack. They even pulled out our best ships out of Pearl Harbor so that they wouldn't be sunk. And so there's a lot to go over on Pearl Harbor if you folks want to do some research on that. Vietnam, most people are aware of that now, when they said that the North Vietnamese launched torpedoes at the destroyer Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin. It didn't happen. That led us into a 10-year, a decade-long war, and how many millions killed there. And then later on, you have former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara finally getting a conscience on his deathbed and saying, you know what, it never happened. And yet we went to war for 10 years over a lie. Kennedy, his assassination, how many years did we hear that the Warren Commission said, no, it's a lone gunman? It's that Lee Harvey Oswald guy, and they said everybody was conspiracy theorists for thinking anything else, that, there might have been shots from the grassy knoll. And then, of course, later on, you get the 1976 House Select Committee on Assassinations, and they actually say it was probably a conspiracy theory. And they also said the same thing for Martin Luther King. So And then beyond Kennedy, you've got Watergate. If those guys wouldn't have been caught, they probably would have been calling that a conspiracy also. You've got the CIA running drugs in America. A well-known journalist for the San Jose Mercury News wrote about that, Gary Webb. And after he broke that story, well, they find him, dead from alleged suicide. The 1993 World Trade Center bombing. The FBI actually provided the bomb for Ramzi Youssef. Very few people know that. Now, that's a story that was published in the New York Times. But again, it comes out and then it goes away real quick. It's not one of those stories that, like a Britney Spears thing, where they'll keep top of mind in the news for weeks on end. You see it once and it's gone. But the fact is, they were part of that. They were supposed to provide a fake bomb, and they didn't. An FBI agent, Nancy Floyd, she admitted that her supervisors botched the whole thing. The 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, you've got General Benjamin Parton, who is a renowned demolitions expert. A guy knows his stuff, and he testified, he's adamant that absolutely no way that a fertilizer bomb could have destroyed the Murrah building. And then when you look into that a little bit further, you find out, oh, hey, all the paperwork for the Whitewater investigation was stored in the Murrah building. Isn't that interesting? Which is very much like many of the key documents for the Enron scandal, the California energy scandal, and many other SEC investigations were all housed in the World Trade Center. What a coincidence, Joe. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very convenient, all in one neat place.
And so now, and those are just a few of them. You've got, the Lusitania, which, the Germans torpedoed, and, we tipped them off, supposedly, said, hey, there's going to be some armaments on that their vessel. And, well, what were the Germans to do? They weren't going to let that through, so they sink it, and that's our entry into war. There's so many of them, all the way down through history that if you just take a look, false flag operations, it's commonplace. Governments have been doing it since, back to Rome and then some. But now, we're up to the biggest conspiracy of all, 9/11, and that one's very troubling to me. Because, that first day when you watch those towers go down, I don't know how anybody, that with a little bit of physics background can't see that, there's controlled demolition taking place there. You've got 110 stories that dropped in 9 to 10 seconds. And for me, that was the first thing I did was get my stopwatch. I thought, wow, there's something wrong here. And when you do the math, you realize that that's 12 floors per second. Now, think about that, folks. Yeah. just say to yourself, 1/1000, because that's 12 floors falling from top to bottom, 1/1000. Can you honestly believe that a 12-story building drops that fast? 1/1000. Because that's what the math figures out.
That's amazing. Boy, conspiracy. We'll be talking about that all night tonight. There certainly is no shortage of that. So stay tuned, sit tight. We'll be right back, folks. You're listening to Freedomlink Radio.
I woke up this morning in the pouring rain, underneath the trestle of a northbound train. Gotta get back home, I've been away too long.
And boy, how you're demonized for it, aren't you? It's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
You just start digging for the truth, and by God, you get all that attention. And all of a sudden, your YouTube channel suspended and all sorts of other kind of crap. It's really getting crazy. And, this SOPA thing is a conspiracy in and of itself, only it's a conspiracy of a lot of people, not just two. You got a lot more people involved there. But that's, the funny thing about that is that the same people who are pushing for SOPA are the same people who marketed the piracy software.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
Yeah, it's crazy. But, that just goes to show you how corrupt the world really is. But I don't want you to lose track, man. Go ahead and continue with what you were saying.
Well, it's big money, and that's the whole thing to realize that big money is behind most every major crime in this world, folks. There's always somebody making a dime on big crime, and all the conspiracies we've talked about, they all meet an agenda. They all facilitate something for somebody in government or for some nation, and to think that just a few people are capable of crime and politicians and people in positions of government are not capable of crime. That's just ridiculous. So, again, when they cry conspiracy theory, don't look away. That's the time to take a look. And again, the opposite of conspiracy theory is coincidence theory. Always remember that. So if it's not a conspiracy, then are you really going to believe that it's just a coincidence? Coincidence doesn't just happen when somebody benefits. That's what I've always found out. But nevertheless, all the way through, we're 9/11 we talked about, and there's so much about 9/11 that people really need to look into. We talked about how fast the buildings came down, and that was just the first thing, the first day that that caught my attention, and from then on.
And you noticed that right away, Tim?
Oh, absolutely. Those things came down so fast. I've seen enough buildings, drop from controlled demolition before that it was obvious. Now, it was different in the fact that they dropped from the top down, so obviously some different technology involved there, but nevertheless, 110 stories straight into their own footprint. I mean, they didn't topple over to the side, left or right. It was nice, neat, and clean.
Well, one of the interesting things or characteristics about the events of 9/11 was the fact that there was a very large absence of rubble. It was like all dust, but the rubble, the debris, almost missing. And then here we have 1 million tons of two buildings, 500,000 tons or 500 million tons each, something like that. They're huge. And the bathtub that they sit in wasn't heavily damaged at all. As a matter of fact, it was only until these large cranes were going through there that they were worried about the bathtub cracking or slurry wall breaking. And the other thing that was really interesting was the lack of seismic activity. You would think for these buildings crashing down to the ground with such force and such weight that you'd have some sort of seismic activity, much akin to the King Dome. When the King Dome was destroyed, it registered on the Richter scale far away. But yet that was mysteriously missing when the Twin Towers fell. So isn't that interesting that those characteristics were there along with the fact that it fell at free fall speed,
Yeah, absolutely. And again, folks, 110 floors in 9 to 10 seconds. And you do the math, that's 12 floors a second. And again, 1,000. 12 floors now just collapsed in that amount of time. And that's just physically impossible, because what happens is the top floors have to, let's say the 110th floor has to hit the 109th floor, and it's got to go, and then it's got to give way, and then that's got to fall onto the 108th floor and the 107th floor, and it takes time before each floor gives way. And so if someone's trying to tell you something different, don't believe them, for crying out loud. Architects have been building, large structures for years, and they're overrated so that if a floor does collapse, they will hold. They don't just drop that quick. So that was one of the fallacies in that argument to begin with. And then there's so many other strange things about that. People were down below moving gold out of the vaults for some reason, while 9/11 was going on. That there was a heist going on there. Not only did you have people that were making money on put options, but you had people stealing gold down below, so
sure.
This whole thing, there's just so many things about 9/11 that you need to take a look at, and then it was like the conspiracy umbrella company. You know what I mean? It was like 9/11 is this like top conspiracy, and then underneath there's 100 little mini conspiracies that form this one gigantic one, if you know what I mean. It's just amazing how many different things were going on at that one point in time, but it just goes to highlight how much and how corrupt things really have gotten. Yeah, and the only way to pull this off, folks, is it's as hard as it is to say at some point, you have to realize that the media is not helping us. The media has failed us all. They can go on and pontificate all they want about burglaries that day and the price of rice in China and stuff, but there are major crimes that have happened, crimes of state that they just don't touch. And these people are trained in investigative journalism, but yet they refuse to look into 9/11. If they did, they'd certainly change the tune right away, because there is so much about 9/11 that is just wrong. Any of you out there in the audience that have looked into it already know this. And for those that haven't, I beg you, take a look. Don't believe what somebody else says. Jim Meigs and these people from Popular Mechanics Home, my gosh, that was one of the most lame efforts to try to attack the 9/11 truth movement.
Sure.
There's nothing more I can
plus
say about that.
He's a close relation to Michael Chertoff, who just so happens to be the one man that's benefiting a lot from these naked body scanners.
Oh, yeah.
That all came into place, and there was a reason for it, because of these stinking quote-unquote terrorists with box cutters and everything else. Oh, yeah, let's put X-ray machines everywhere. Yeah, underwear bombs, that's it, yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, is that you can't even for a second tell me that somebody with explosives in their underwear line in there are going to blow up a plane. Come on, man. Or like the shoe bomber. Come on. You guys got, gee whiz. Come up with something a little more believable than that.
And the media buys it all. They buy it all, and that's just, you just shake your head and go, come on, people. It's like, do you have to have an IQ to work in the media? And, I was involved in the media for 25 years in broadcasting. And, I mentioned before that, there was the one thing they told us in journalism school is there's two rules. You always follow the truth. And the number 2 rule is never become involved in entangling alliances that prevent you from following rule 1. Yet our entire media system is involved in entangling alliances with government agencies where they're actually members. We talked about the Council on Foreign Relations. So many of them. I won't go through the list again. People can listen to the archives for Sunday night show. But, every one of the major anchors, so many of the major news reporters all belong to the Council on Foreign Relations, which, as I always say, at best is a foreign policy think tank, which is there to influence foreign affairs. And at the very worst, they're an advocate for the New World Order. So what kind of journalism are you going to get from people that are mingling in the Council for Foreign Relations? They should remember this rule that journalists are supposed to remember when they attack a story. Always follow the truth, and forget those entangling alliances. So this is how we're fooled. Our media is not helping us out at all. They know better, and I like to call them accessories, because, again, they've been trained in investigative journalism, and they're not doing their job. But now, as we mentioned the other night, there are some good journalists. I don't want to pick on all of them, but the media does operate in a hierarchy from the top down, and they're able to squelch stories, very easy. And also the fact that our media is owned by only 6 corporations, that also makes it very easy to control.
Yeah, unbelievably easy.
But when you look at the takeover America and when things really went awry, you can go back quite a ways in history. But to me, the most tumultuous spot in American history was the Reconstruction period, right after the Civil War.
Sure. Hold that thought, Tim. Hold that thought. We'll be right back, folks. Tim's really getting into it now. 3 minutes, not a long time to wait. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. It's the last segment of hour number 1. I'm here with Tim Watson. We're talking conspiracy. And right now, specifically, we're talking post-Civil War. And there was an awful lot of conspiracy from Lincoln on forward, wasn't there, Tim?
This is a period that we don't talk about much in our history books and in school. They don't dwell on the Reconstruction period, at least not from this angle, with all these presidents being assassinated in a short amount of time. And when you think about it, the Secret Service was formed in 1865. Now, they say originally, they were formed to handle monetary issues and stuff like that, and to watch for counterfeiting and stuff. But they also, were responsible for our presidents as well. They failed miserably, because the year they were formed, you had the assassination of President Lincoln. And then just a few years later, in 1881, you have the assassination of President Garfield. And then in 1901, you have the assassination of President McKinley. So that's 3 presidents from 1865 to 1901. That's incredible. That's a very short 36-year period of time. Now,
sure.
That's the equivalent, for those of you old enough, from 1975 up until 2011. Now, think about that. If we had 3 presidents that were capped, from 1975 until now, you'd have to ask yourself, what the hell is going on in the country? What is going on in this world? We can't protect 3 presidents. But yet this happened in our nation's history, from 1865 to 1901. So there was a great struggle going on behind the scenes of America. And what it was a fight for the central bank. And the central banks, we talk about the bankers being the great evil in this world because they have the great money, the big amounts of money to be able to pull off, large affairs, crimes of state and stuff like that. Now, it's not your local bank, but these are the central banks, the banks that the local banks report to. And the central banks, well, I think we only had a couple of them early on, and the second one was killed by Andrew Jackson in 1833. That was one of his things he was most proud of. He said he killed the bank. And ever since then, the Rothschilds fought with this country to try to get a central bank back in. And that's essentially what you had going on. The Civil War was definitely not a war for slavery or the issues that they told us in school. That was an instrumental divide. Somebody fomented that. And, more than likely, a lot of people point the finger at the Rothschilds because they wanted their central bank back, so they divided the nation. United we stand, divided we fall. And Lincoln wanted to finance the war, but the banks wanted far too much money and interest, and he knew that was going to bankrupt the country. So what did Lincoln do? He came up with his Lincoln Greenbacks, which is interest-free money. Well, that totally ticked off the central banks, and you can see what happened with Lincoln. And then you go through Garfield and you go through McKinley in a short amount of time. And what it is, it's a fight to try to get a central bank back into this country. And very shortly after the assassination of McKinley, we have the Federal Reserve come up. One of our presidents, Taft, he was very much against the Federal Reserve and against central banks. A lot of people were. But yet the powers that be, got together with Wilson and said, look, if you'll support our central bank, we're behind you. And that's how Wilson ended up getting into office. But before the Federal Reserve started up, you had our first economic crash, which is very much like what we're going through right now. And for those of you that have read a little bit more on history, that's J.P. Morgan started that crash with a rumor back in 1907 that one of the New York banks was about to become insolvent, and that's what started the panic and the run on all the banks. And that whole thing was actually contrived in order to convince Congress that we need a central bank. We really need something to kind of control the currency in this country. So it was all a manipulation by the bankers, to bring the Federal Reserve in. So 9 years after our last presidential assassination, you've got a group of 6 people, very powerful and wealthy men, that meet in secret off the coast of Georgia on Jekyll Island in 1910, and that was the coup of all coups on America. And these guys were so adamant about people not knowing who they were, they actually replaced all of the servants on the island because they didn't want anybody to recognize them. And then they even went to greater degrees by not calling each other by their names. They used code names. They didn't want anybody to know who was behind this coup. And it was the Rockefellers, the Warburgs, the Kuhn Loan banking interests, you had J.P. Morgan folks, and the Rothschilds. And they were invited to this meeting by Senator Nelson Aldrich. And that was the coup on America. That's when everything went awry in this country. And you have to realize that's why people like Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich and John F. Kennedy, why they fought against the Federal Reserve. They realized that this was a cartel of bankers. The Federal Reserve is not owned by the United States government. That's a real easy thing you can prove to yourself by going and looking it up. Look in your phone book. They're not in the government listing. They're in the regular pages, the white pages. So they're not listed in your blue pages or anything like that. But they're not a federal entity, and they need to go because all our wars have been fomented by these bankers. I think you mentioned earlier, Joe, that the banks, they play both sides of the war, and that's what the Federal Reserve has done for years.
Absolutely.
But so as a result of their meeting at Jekyll Island in 1910, we've got the Federal Reserve was born in 1913. And then from that point on, it's Katie bar the door, and it happened on, Woodrow Wilson's watch. And I mentioned that the bankers, they got behind Wilson in order to get him in office and to perpetrate this scam on the country. But when Wilson left office, you remember, what he said. He was very remorseful about allowing the Federal Reserve to take over. He said, to quote, I'm a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is now controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated in the hands of a few men. We've come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the world. No longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of small groups of dominant men. And that's a very powerful statement, for Woodrow Wilson to make. This guy was not happy about what he did. But
he made a blood deal. He made a blood deal for the country.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what he did. It's unbelievable.
But, if you think about it, folks, what kind of power you have at your fingertips when you control the currency of a nation. How much power do you have? It's not in the hands of government, but it's in the hands of a private corporation, of just a few men. And that's exactly what we have under the Federal Reserve Act. And that's why Ron Paul very much wants to get rid of the Federal Reserve. And that is very much why everybody, is attacking Ron Paul. They don't want to lose their game. This game is worth not trillions, it's quadrillions of dollars to them. And actually more than that, it's power. It's the power to control all of us. It's the power to, start wars whenever they want. So, start looking a lot harder at people like Ron Paul when they talk about, the Federal Reserve. I think we talked last show about the Federal Reserve during the bailouts. Most people don't realize they gave out $16 trillion that you and I are going to pay for, our grandkids are going to pay for, and on and on. That's an enormous amount of money, $16 trillion. And that could have been given to us. We would have all got money, 100,000 plus easily if they gave a check to each and every one of us. And we would have gone out and paid off our mortgages. We would have bought things. We would have stimulated retail. We would have stimulated, manufacturing, and the money then would have made it to the bank. But the Federal Reserve decided they didn't want to do that. What they did was they paid off the rich people. They paid off the banks.
Well, because they don't want people like us to have to be financially independent, because if you do that, then all of a sudden we're not under their thumb anymore.
Exactly.
So their slave labor goes away. You know what I mean?
Yep, and there goes control. And so you got to ask yourself, why didn't they give us the money? Because the money would have made it to the bank anyway. You would have spent it at retail. Manufacturing would have been stimulated. Again, it makes it to the bank. We're all better off. But no, they gave it to people that aren't lending that money out now. What they're doing is they're buying up fledgling companies and making themselves stronger. And it's the exact same scam they ran on us, with the first Great Depression. They start buying up smaller companies for pennies on the dollar. And you can prove that by looking at the S&P reported this year that the top 500 companies in America have all increased their holdings by 60%. 60%. And that's since 2008. Now, in the second or arguably the worst depression the world's had, your company is increasing its holdings by 60%. Think about that, folks. I mean, really, let that sit in for a second. 60%. So if you go to your board of directors and say, hey, Bob, I've increased our holdings during the worst economic downturn by 15%. hey, cigars for everybody. You're going to Bermuda, vacations, bonuses for everybody, and that's for 15%. But they've increased them 60%. And what that tells you is the game is rigged against us, folks. It's rigged in their favor.
It is rigged in their favor.
By casino terminology, that's called gaming the house. And you know what that'll get you, Joe. You game the house, they're going to drag your ass out back and they're going to beat you in the alley.
That's right. Well, it's the end of hour number 1, folks. Hour number 2 coming up. It's like they say, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Welcome to hour number 2, everybody. Joe Joseph here, along with my guest, Tim Watts of the AmericanTruthNetwork.com. And we're talking conspiracy and the media tonight. I mean, it's just unbelievable, some of the conspiracies that have happened through history, and also the control the media has on the populace. And, we were talking about the Federal Reserve, right, Tim? Right before we ended hour number 1. And how it was, was it 6 bankers? For the most part,
yes.
6 families,
right?
That took part in that meeting at Jekyll Island. But isn't it also interesting that there's only 6 corporations that control the entire media, the entire mainstream media? So just like the Federal Reserve had their little elitist get together, the mainstream media exerts that same type of power on the masses, much akin to the banksters.
A very, very small portion, of the populace. I mean, a cabal. That's essentially what they are. You've got, just a few people like that. It is a cabal, a cartel. And when you've got power, folks, it doesn't take the entire government. That's the other thing that I like to mention, that, when people say, oh, it's our government's corrupt. I'll always argue against that, because there are many good people in government. It's just too impossible for the entire government to be corrupt, or for the entire CIA to be corrupt, or for the entire FBI. It's rogue factions. It's just like when you were in school or at work, there's a few bad apples everywhere, and they coalesce together. And when you get that, kind of collaboration, you've got trouble. And that's what we had, when the banks came in and took over America. Interest-free money, that's what we left England for. Granted, we wanted away from the monarchy, but we wanted away from the outrageous taxation and stuff like that. And when the colonies first started up, we were very prosperous, and they wanted to know why we were so prosperous. And Benjamin Franklin said, well, it's our colonial script we use. And the colonial script was interest-free. And that's the key to prosperity for a nation, is to have interest-free money. But, the Rothschilds, you hate to just stick on one family, but folks, there is one family that you really need to take a look at. They've been in charge of the central banks and the banking systems of Europe and the world now for years. And it was Mayor Amsel Rothschild who said he didn't care about, who made the laws, so long as he got to control the currency, because whoever controls the currency controls everything. And that's absolutely the way it goes. And this is how they took America back over, after the Civil War. And again, we mentioned the Civil War was a little more than what people originally thought. They divided us to conquer us. And then they swooped in afterwards, to clean up the pieces. But again, with the colonial script being interest-free, then you had Lincoln with his greenbacks, which were interest-free, and that was a good thing for the country. And then you've got JFK, who later on, John F. Kennedy, who, signed Executive Act 11110, which allowed silver certificates. And that was a threat to the Federal Reserve, because they didn't want that. They want their interest, their fiat money, so that they can bankrupt us. For all intents and purposes, our country was bankrupt. I want to say around 1933 or in the early 30s. It didn't take long after the Federal Reserve was formed before we essentially lost our sovereignty in this country. And that's a fact. Things just went south really fast. I mean, when you have no money, Joe, and I give you $3, and I say, oh, by the way, you owe me $5 back. You go, wait a minute, but I've only got $3. You gave me $3, And that's people don't realize, part of the IRS, they restructured that then also, and that most of your IRS money goes to pay off the central bank cartel, because they want their interest for the money they gave us. And so that's basically what we're doing. We're trying to pay down interest, and it's a debt that we can never repay. It just keeps accruing and accruing, and the more money they pump out, they go, hey, you owe us some more. You owe us some more. And it's just perpetual debt. And again, it's a way of control, and that's what fiat money is all about. It's a way of control. And so with the banks. We've talked about the banks, and you're right, six people that came together, and in the media, we've got 6 corporations. It's just a very, very small faction of people that have an agenda, and their agenda not only is power and wealth, but control. They want to control everything, and so after the banks and the media, you've got our politicians, and what do politicians need to stay in office, Joe? Aside from votes, they need money. Yeah. And so they become beholden to the banks at that point. We lose our government. It's taxation without representation for all intents and purposes. So, but at any rate, that's a very key thing to understand about this country is the Federal Reserve. And about the entire world, the IMF, and the central banks. Again, it's not your local bank. It's the big central banks that feed all of the small banks. So,
right. But even then, look at the small banks. The small banks are dying and or dead. They're few and far between now. When you go on every street corner, it's a Bank of America. It's a Wells Fargo. It's a big national bank now that you're dealing with. And the very small ones are few and far between. The credit unions are really the only thing left as far as like small town independent banks are concerned.
Yeah. So it's a whole control system that we're under, and you've got to be bright about it, and you've got to look, a little deeper than what they're teaching you in school. You can't expect them to teach you this, in our history books. Again, as Winston Churchill once said, the victor always writes the history, and that's so true. Yeah,
isn't that right?
They're not going to.
And look at the works of Norman Dodd, of in the 50s, investigating the endowments. Unbelievable stuff. If anybody hasn't seen G. Edward Griffin's, not so much a documentary, it's kind of a documentary, more of an interview with Norman Dodd right before he passed away. He was the Ken Starr of the 1950s when it came to investigating the endowments. And to make a long story short, what they came to find out is, the Guggenheim Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, the Rockefellers were grooming these students right out of college.
Yep.
Putting them in academia in positions where they could rewrite the history books with whatever they wanted, all the textbooks, everything. And it was a takeover of the U.S. education system. That's what it all ended up to be. What a phenomenal interview, but what a huge and just unbelievable concept to wrap your arms around.
But, when you think about it, it all makes sense. If you were going to take over a nation, how would you do it? You're going to take over their financial system first, because that's at the root of everything. And that's what people need to realize. That's how they did it. They didn't even have to fire a shot. They just took over our currency. And with that, we're suddenly under their thumb.
Isn't that interesting now that most wars that we see fought, the ones on the ground are just scratch the surface compared to the wars that are fought behind the scenes that nobody really sees. The economic wars, the monetary wars, the trade wars that go on that people really don't have an understanding of because it doesn't really affect them directly, I guess you could say. But it really does, folks. This drives our prices up. Inflation goes through the roof. All because of a very, very, very small elitist cabal. Look at that. I can rhyme too. You're listening to Freedomlink Radio on the Orion Talk Radio Network. democracy and the media and just how much we've been bamboozled over the last, 2 centuries. Oh, let's go back even farther. I mean, come on. This stuff has gone on since the beginning of time.
Yep.
We, the peasants, I'll tell you, man, we're close. We're close to grabbing our pitchforks. I'm thinking in our torches. What do you think, Tim?
Well, you're right, Joe. It's been going on for millennium. You know, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. As long as man's been around, you know, there's somebody tries to find a way to control the whole parade. So, but you know, the key, folks, is to identify, you know, their tool that they use to keep you in the dark, or all the tools that they use. And number one is that term we talked about, conspiracy theory. They throw that out and they expect you to just discount, you know, allegations offhand, out of hand, immediately because someone said, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. Well, again,
Sure.
Conspiracy's in the dictionary. It's a legal definition. Look it up. You know,
in the real world, though, Tim, you know, conspiracy is a good word, but in this backwards world we live in, oh no, conspiracy. Yeah, tinfoil hat. You're a kook. You're a whack job. Ho ho ho. But you know, it's funny that you say that, because the Justice Department is rife with conspiracy, but you don't see them talking about that. Operation Gun Runner, you know, all the war on drugs, just like you said. Yet they use conspiracy all the time to convict us.
Yeah.
The poor little guy, the sap.
It's a daily occurrence for the Justice Department. They work off conspiracy. That's all they prosecute. And yet when someone points a finger at our government and says, hey, you guys are guilty of conspiracy, you're guilty of high crimes, and they say, oh, no, that's a conspiracy theory. No. And, you know, so you've got to recognize it for what it is. This is a tool, you know, that they have once again brainwashed us. They've ingrained this in our brains for so many years now, to think that once you hear conspiracy theory, you know, again, like the Wizard of Oz, don't pay attention to that man behind the screen. Look away, folks. Nothing to see here. Move along. But, you know, just look at some of these things. And one of the easiest ones to prove to yourself is about the Federal Reserve. It's very easy to look it up and find out that it's not part of our government. I mean, sure, they're involved with our government, but again, these are private banks. These are private bankers, you know, a cartel that are making their money off you and I, and that have basically destroyed our country for mere profit and control for themselves. So that's the first thing. If somebody asks me, you know, about conspiracy, I say, you know, if you want to look up one that you can prove to yourself, go read about the Federal Reserve. You'll become very, very aware and very enlightened very fast. And, you know, another one, Joe, that most people don't realize about, that I always catch people on is, you know, I said, did you know that there was a fascist coup that took place in this country, you know, just before World War II, that they tried to set up a fascist government in the United States, just the same as they were doing in Nazi Germany. And, you know, they'll look at you and go, oh, get out of here. We would have learned about that in school. It's like, well, once again, no, because the victor gets to write the history, and they own the publishing houses, and they're not going to put this in the school books. But in 1934, you had the coup against FDR, and you had the bonus army, where these guys were due money from the federal government, and rather than waiting, I think, 20 years or something, they wanted to wait till they got their money. The government wanted them to wait. They didn't want that. They wanted their money now. And a lot of the well-to-do in this country decided to use this bonus army to their benefit, or at least they tried. They wanted to organize them in a coup against FDR. And what they did was they went out and they recruited, the wrong guy for them. You know, unfortunately for us, one of the most unsung American patriots this country doesn't even know about, and that's General Smedley D. Butler. And this guy was a general for years, and he wrote the book War is a Racket, a great read if you ever want to read something sometimes. And he, you know, this guy was a lifer in the military, but he was so disillusioned when he got out that, you know, he wrote his book, War is a Racket, and he said, you know, he was nothing more than a thug, a henchman for the corporations, you know, supporting, wars for corporate benefit is essentially what it was. So, but there were a lot of the rich people in America that set this coup up. The DuPonts, E.F. Hutton, Prescott Bush was said to be involved. The Remingtons, J.P. Morgan again, that guy's involved in everything. And the whole coup fell apart because Smedley Butler was smart enough to play along for a while, and then once he, got wind of what was going on and found out the people behind it, he revealed everything. And if you don't believe that, look up the McCormick-Dickstein Committee. McCormick-Dickstein Committee. Google that sometime and find out. Now, McCormick-Dickstein Committee said, yeah, there was a coup. They found out that people did try to topple this government. And, I think maybe a couple of people might have got their wrists slapped, but most of the wealthy in this country were allowed to go free. Why? They...
yeah.
So
all I'm saying is that isn't it interesting, Tim, that there's not word one of this anywhere in any history books whatsoever? I mean, you have to literally dig your tail off to find this stuff.
Yeah,
look
and
up
it's easy. Yeah.
I mean, are we going to get to that tonight?
Wow, there's so much to talk about on conspiracy. We could probably do this for a week, Joe. I mean, on so many different topics. But yeah, there's a guy that was involved in so much, from that fascist coup, against FDR, and then trading with the enemy during World War II with Hitler, and on and on and on. But again, money is power, folks, and that's how things like this are obtained or how they're pulled off. It's not people like Joe Joseph and Tim Watts and Popeye, whatever. It's not your ordinary people, because we don't have the means. We can't facilitate crimes of state. It takes a lot of money to pull off a lot of the things that they've done.
Sure does.
If you look, 9/11, for instance.
Well, the thing is, though, Tim, there's a money trail. And you can follow that money trail, and it will yield some answers as far as who's behind it and everything else, like, for example, you bring up 9/11. How interesting is it that in June of 2001, Larry Silverstein insures the World Trade Centers against terrorist attack by airplane? You just can't make this stuff up,
Right, now that's either a conspiracy, Joe, or that's just a coincidence. Yep. So you got to take your pick, folks. Is it a conspiracy or is it a coincidence that he just happened to insure the towers, and he profited? And I like to say that I call him Lee Harvey Silverstein. Because,
Lee Harvey Silverstein.
He is essentially set up to be the patsy. That's the way I look at it. That's my opinion. But, you remember when he came out and he said that, he'd talked to the firefighters and they said they were going to pull the buildings. And then later on, a year later, he recants that and says, no, I never said anything. What I meant to say was that we wanted to pull the firemen out of Building 7. And well, there were no firemen in, World Trade Center 7. They were off working on World Trade Center 1 and 2. So that's a very disingenuous excuse on his part. But here's a guy that, profited. He made $4.5 billion at the minimum. Some people say it was more. But, I mean, he made billions of dollars, and his initial investment was, only millions. So
$14 billion. He was awarded $7 billion per building.
Yeah.
$14 billion when they were condemned. A lot of people don't know that they were condemned.
That's a good point.
Because of the amount of asbestos that was in there, and the cost of abatement actually outweighed the cost of the buildings. When we come back, we'll talk more about conspiracy with my man Tim Watts of the AmericanTruthNetwork.com. Go check that website out because it is a fantastic resource of alternative media sources. We'll be right back, folks. Don't go away. She stood there bright For anybody that wants to know more about that coup that transpired in 1934 with FDR, you can go to YouTube and look up the White House coup. And that is a little documentary video on what transpired in 1934. My guest tonight is Tim Watts of the AmericanTruthNetwork.com. And he is just going off the hook with some knowledge here and imparting it to you so that you understand that you're not as crazy as you might think or as people might tell you. And that really,
Yeah.
in the end, you're just doing fine. And the best thing to do is just keep digging for the answers, keep digging for the truth. But one thing to be sure to do, and this is something that I try to tell people quite often, is be responsible too. Make sure you verify what it is you're reading and what you're seeing. Don't just go out and say, oh, make a YouTube video, because that's how things like Ellen's going to be crashing into the Pacific Ocean at midnight tonight. Yeah. How about that? So really be careful about what it is you're chasing and do your best to vet what you're seeing.
Yes.
And
Good
to
advice,
verify.
Joe.
Because when you don't and you put out stuff like what I just said, it discredits everybody. It's like the old adage, one bad egg spoils a dozen.
Yeah.
You know? So just be careful with that. But I can tell you this, that, you know, all things aside, people have every right to be afraid and to be scared, because just looking at the actions of not only our government, but other governments throughout the world, you know, we have deep underground military bases all over the world, or deep underground shelters. We've got seed vaults built in haste all over the world. What's going on? Why all the preparations? FEMA camps? Why? What's going on? NDAA? Is there a need or a reason for the language in the Defense Authorization Act? What the hell does that have to do with appropriations? Having people detained indefinitely. These are all things we need answers to, and that we don't really get on my YouTube channel, the Freedomlink Radio. You can see what Lindsey Graham's thoughts were on. He's tooting his own horn. He's patting himself on the back after he wrote it. It's sitting at his desk twirling his pen. I worked for years on this language. Yeah. Okay. Secret torture provisions. Get you some. I'm gonna get those answers, baby. I'm gonna get those answers. You wait. I'll get them from you. Oh yeah, I'll make you squeal like a pig. I'm telling you. That's the kind of people we have in Washington, folks. The only way that this changes is if we knock them out. We got to get them out of there. Got to get them out of there. 2008, we only had a 17% turnover. Yeah, that's not going to do much. I mean, granted, we got gridlock right now. That's good. Gridlock's good. We're actually seeing Obama's true colors in a lot of ways because of the impasse in Congress. He says, oh, no, I'm just going to bypass it. Oh, for the good of the American people, of course. You know, for the good of the American people. The middle class is getting pounded here. So you know what we need? You need me to take care of you, because I know what your best interests are. See, Kyle. And really, that's what it is. You know, it's a farce, Tim. It's a farce that Obama is a Muslim or a Muslim sympathizer. It's a big farce. Because he...
Well, go ahead.
Anything but... And the whole birth certificate thing, is it valid? To a point, it's valid, but not in the way that people think. You know, one of the conspiracies is Obama has a CIA background.
Yes.
And that his Social Security number actually traces back to Connecticut. How does that happen if he was born in Hawaii? So these are all interesting things to go and search for. You know, and then What's the whole birther thing then? Is that a distraction? A distraction from what? What are you distracting about, you know? And the powers that be will insert deception even within the truth movement.
Sure.
Because there are some theories about what happened at 9/11 that sound really good and make you really want to believe it, but it's not real. And it's put out there to deceive or to water down.
No, these people are brilliant bastards, Joe. You make a good point.
And
you know?
patient. And patient.
They want to control the message, and that's the idea. If you can control the message, you're much better off, you know, when you've got people going after you trying to prove the truth. So they will go to the nth degree to try to control the message and skew it in their favor. But, you're talking about Obama and all the things that we've had go wrong in this country for the last, 12 years now since 9/11. And look, folks, it really comes down to getting out of the political trap. I can't say this enough. I'll say this every single time I ever come on with Joe is get out of the trap. Quit it with this, your team, my team mentality. We are divided, Democrats and Republicans. That's not what our forefathers wanted. We had a lot of political parties at one time, but somehow we've boiled it down to two now. And that's exactly what they wanted, because they realized, united we stand, divided we fall, and that's what they've got. And the day after the election comes, it's like the Super Bowl. Did my team win? Did my team win? And then from that point on, you're either against the president or against the person you didn't vote for, or you're staunchly sticking up for them with your head in the sand like an ostrich and refusing to look at what's, plainly apparent right in front of your face. And I'm sorry, but Obama made a buttload of promises that he has not kept up. Guantanamo, still running. All the wars still going. Matter of fact, started a new one. Went in, attacked Libya, a very successful company, said the guy was a dictator, but yet the United Nations is about to present him with a humanitarian award. Geez, really, they're going to go present a tyrant, a dictator, with a humanitarian award. There's a lot that just doesn't add up. You need to take a look, beyond the mainstream media. You need to look for the truth. And like Joe said, search. There's many avenues to find the truth, but, don't take our word for it. You've got to dig, and don't just stop on the first thing you find. Prove it to yourself. Prove it. You've got to go through and find other sources, and start with one topic at a time. Start with the Federal Reserve and then work your way up and gain some enlightenment, because once you've got a foundation that you've been duped, you're suddenly pulled out of the matrix,
Yeah.
The old movie.
Stay as impartial and as skeptical as possible when you go searching for this stuff, because what ends up happening is you have this feeling and you have these emotions that will sometimes skew your judgment, and you'll believe things that feel good or feel right, but they're not right. And oftentimes the truth is not pretty. It's not comfortable. It doesn't feel right. It's downright crappy, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be able to accept that reality, or to be able to say to yourself, well, dadgummit, I've been duped, and I was wrong, and now I know. But you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to admit that there may be some things that we think is right, and in reality, they're not. A lot of things have been put in place since 9/11, Tim.
Yeah, a ton has been put in place.
Oh,
I mean, if you're not paying attention, folks, for crying out loud, you're asleep. Step away from the tube, put the remote down. A ton has happened to this country in just 11 years' time.
But there's an
incredible
equal amount of deception as well. And they throw it out there to muddy the water so that you can't really see the truth for what it is. So this is what you have to do, is you got to wade through the muck and see it all. And none of this is change in a positive direction, I must say. We are in a death spiral right now. I'm sorry to inform you, for those that don't feel it, that don't know it, that may be unemployed right now, or down on their luck, or their house was foreclosed on, or their car was repossessed, or whatever. If you can't tell that we're not suffering, if you're not suffering yourself, good Lord, man, what's it going to take? Final segment of the show coming up. Timmy and I are going to close it out. We'll be right back in 3 minutes. You're listening to Freedomlink Radio on the Orion Talk Radio Network. Well, folks, it's been one doozy of a show talking about conspiracies, and we're only scratching the surface. One thing I want to put out before the show is over is Popeye and I are now doing a podcast over on the intelhub.com. And you can go to the intelhub.com. I think there's a podcast page set up there now. We just recorded a new one today, so it will be posted tonight or tomorrow. But we'll be doing this regularly as a partnership between Orion Talk Radio and the intelhub.com, because in these days, it's so important that we see through the divisiveness that's pervasive in our society, and we start to band together. And it's going to have to start with us, and that includes the alternative media. You know, all the infighting, all the competition, that's not what it's supposed to be. You know, our founding fathers sacrificed everything they had to make this country free. And my God, have we taken it for granted over the course of time. And look at where we are now. Infinitely worse than they had it. You know?
Yeah.
I'm really. My wife is a direct descendant of John Jay. You know? And it's just, it's awful. It breaks her heart, breaks my heart to see what we've become. Go ahead, Tim. Sorry about that.
No, I was just going to say the great experiment they did. They gave us something that nobody else had, you know, and it's fallen into ruin. And, you know, I hate to say it, but, you know, it's our fault, folks, because we've fallen asleep at the wheel. We've become too enamored with, you know, the tube, entertainment. And there's a reason why we're the most overly entertained society on the face of the earth. You know, it's so that we don't look into these other things. They don't want you to look at this stuff. You know, they'd rather have you watching, you know, Dancing with the Stars and whatever, you know, the other crap that's on TV now. You know, they'd rather spend you watching poor reality TV shows than actually looking into what real reality is that's happening around you each and every day. You know,
or how about fluoride, Tim?
Oh yeah, there's another one.
How about fluoride? That's a huge one. Yeah. Hey, you know what? You're burnt out. You're looking at the boob tube, just staring away, drooling on yourself. But my God, you've got great teeth. Wow, that's just fantastic. Boy, look at those pearly whites. Yeah. Woo! Yeah, man, that enamel.
Hopefully most of your audience already knows, but fluoride has been known to lower, you know, IQ in humans, you know, and mammals and stuff. So it's like, why do we need it in toothpaste? But, you know, as far as stepping away from the tube, you know, we mentioned the other night, and this is something you can also look up, folks, about, you know, the two Herberts, as I call them, Herbert Marshall McLuhan and Herbert Krugman, who both did studies on TV, and they found out, you know, how it affects the human animal. And when you turn on your television set, within 30 seconds, your brain switches from beta waves to alpha waves. You go from an alert, conscious attention span to, you know, a very unfocused, highly suggestive state. So, and that happens within 30 seconds of turning on your television. It's fact. You can look it up for yourself. So, you know, TV is used against us in more ways than you think. Not only have we got people lying to us on TV or just not looking into the truth, but, you know, your TV is also making you, you know, a little more gullible. It makes you susceptible to the crap that you actually hear on TV.
Sure.
And again, look that up.
Or the subliminal messaging. The subliminal messaging, they've used them for years. Sure. My wife's got a video on her YouTube channel, Divinity Blue, that's BLEU, and you can go there. I think it's a featured video, and it shows the 1960s TV show. At the end of the night, they used to play the national anthem because network television didn't run 24 hours. So they would play the national anthem, and in this particular version, the national anthem was playing, and then they had a caption down at the bottom that actually showed the verses at the same time, and it was in the transition of the verses that they were putting these messages in, and it was amazing some of the stuff that they were trying to tell people, like, you know, rebellion is bad and trust your government, God, and all this kind of stuff. Just different messages that you wouldn't see it if somebody didn't take the time to slow it down and actually look at it. It's really quite amazing. But this has been going on for years. I mean, Tim, they play with the flicker rate. You know,
yes.
Just say and hypnotize people.
Yeah, there are so many things to condition the human animal that people just don't realize. And, you know, again, we are entertained for a reason. We are overly entertained in this country, and people just, they're too much into entertainment. And, you know, it's just a very sad thing, especially when you see what's happened to this country in just such a very short amount of time. And you said it earlier, Joe, these guys are very patient. You can't overturn a democracy overnight because that's when the people notice. So you do it, you know, decade by decade. you know, and but for all intents and purposes, this has all happened during the lifespan of one person. You know, from 1913 on is really the lifespan of one person. So, you know, you can think, oh, you know, they'd never do that over that long of a period. Well, yeah, they do, because, again, that is the only way that you can do this. But, again, it's happened in one person's lifetime, you know, and especially since 9/11.
At least David Rockefeller's lifetime. That guy's older than dirt.
Funny that you should mention that name. You know, I was thinking of that guy too. Yeah, absolutely right, Joe.
There's another rabbit hole to dive down.
Oh yeah, you know, and we're moving too fast. There's just so much to talk about here, folks. And I know your audience is very hip to most of this, Joe. So the key
but you
is,
know what? You can't talk about this stuff enough, Tim. You really can't, and because it's kind of like, you know, in the military, there was an old saying: "You train the way you fight the way you train." And you're always training. You're always doing the same things over and over again, repetition, so that when it comes time to fight, that you know instinctively what to do. Well, knowledge works the same way. You have to arm yourself with knowledge to win this war, to fight these battles. And the only way to fight these battles is to go through this knowledge at time and time and time again and get it down, because there's going to come a day when you're going to be confronted. Case in point, like your police officer, your local police officer, you have to know your rights. If you know your rights, you can disarm them and you can actually defend yourself. And if you don't know what it is, you can't recognize it. I got a good voice in my. It's like this little angel, you know. Only it's my wife, but she's whispering in my telling me all this stuff.
The true brains behind the operation.
It is the true brains. I'm just the mouthpiece. But I mean, that's it. You have to arm yourself with the knowledge. So a lot of times people say, well, you know, oh God, you're talking 9/11 again. No, you can't talk about it enough. You really can't. This needs to be debated often. And
when you look into it, you're going to find, folks, there is so much there. I mean, I've written probably 55,000 words plus on 9/11 alone on just one website, let alone on my News Focus site and, you know, on the American Truth Network site. There's just that much to it. People think, you know, they couldn't have possibly pulled this off, you know, or, you know, that maybe it was the perfect plan. Well, it wasn't. They screwed up. They made a lot of mistakes, and it's up to you to go find them, because they're there, and they're easy to see, you know. They're trying to hide it from you. They're trying to do their best. But if you look, you're going to find it. And you're right, Joe. You need to talk about this a lot. We need to talk about it a lot more than we are.
The advent of the internet has really brought about an age of enlightenment, more so than this world has ever seen. And it's also given us the ability to network so that the debate can go on. You know, that you're not limited now to word of mouth or the telephone or anything like that. We could talk all over the world for nothing. So this great experiment, the internet, that the elite created, is actually turning out to be their downfall, which is why they're attacking it so voraciously right now, because they know that if they don't do something about this, the spread of information, and they don't put a cap on it and start to control it, that they're sunk. And I'll be honest with you. I mean, I'm a believer in the game book that I have, you know, the Bible, and I know what it says, and I know what the end game's going to be, and I know what the outcome's going to be. So in that sense, I'm really not afraid. But we have to fight it. It's our duty, just like it's our duty to try and fight for liberty, and the thing that people have shed their blood for over generations, to preserve the republic and to preserve our freedoms. We have to do the same thing. If we don't, we trash everything that they fought for and what people died for. And I just can't stand for that.
No, you know, and go ahead.
So, I mean, it's just incumbent upon us all to really put our best foot forward here and do what we have to do to win this fight. Go ahead, Tim.
You know, and people need to realize one of the biggest weapons in the world is information. You know, information is power. And they know that. And that's why they work so hard to control it. That's why they've worked to control the media, all the way from J.P. Morgan, hiring, the 12 news managers in 1917 to tell him, what were the most influential newspapers, and then to go out and, buy those papers up, or to, infiltrate them with, their own news managers. And then you look at Operation Mockingbird from the CIA, where they actually infiltrated our media and encouraged journalists to start spreading disinformation in America. They understand how powerful information is. Again, it's probably the most powerful weapon we have. So if you're not educating yourself, if you're not looking into some of the stuff we're talking about, you're not going to be well armed. You're not going to have the tools you need to fight this war. And what it's all about is the New World Order. This is it. They would rather do away with nation status and move us all to a one world order that they can control on their own. And it will be for their profit, folks. It won't be for our good.
Folks, check out the AmericanTruthNetwork.com and NewsFocus.org. Just two of many sites that Tim Watts has. Have a good night, everybody. We'll see you again on Thursday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern. Take care.